No one in the quiet, sunlit gardens of the Hale mansion could have guessed that the man trimming roses and sweeping leaves wasn't just another gardener. His hands, though roughened by soil now, had once signed million-dollar contracts and built empires. His name was Alexander Hale, a billionaire who had disappeared from the public eye without a trace. And no one, not even his closest staff, knew that the man working silently among them was the same Alexander, watching his own family from behind the mask of an ordinary worker. It had all begun months earlier when Alexander started noticing strange things: report of missing funds, unapproved deals, and most unsettling of all, whispers that his fiancée, Vanessa, might not be who she claimed to be. She was charming, graceful, and adored by everyone in high society. But behind her perfect smile, there was something that didn't sit right. His instincts, the same ones that built his fortune, told him she was hiding something. And when his two young children, Emma and Noah, began to act distant around her, he knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, Alexander made a choice that would change everything. He faked a business trip, left his phones behind, and returned to his own mansion under a false identity as the new gardener, Alan. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes, to observe his fiancée, his staff, even his children, without the shadow of his wealth blinding anyone. The transformation was complete. Trimmed hair, worn clothes, dirt under his nails. To the world inside those gates, he was just a quiet man with kind eyes who tended to the roses and kept to himself. For days he watched. Vanessa's sweetness vanished when no one important was looking. The children were often left with the maid, Maria, a woman of few words but a heart full of warmth. She treated Emma and Noah like her own, reading them bedtime stories and sneaking them cookies when Vanessa wasn't around. Alexander began to realize how distant he'd become from his own family. Hidden behind his disguise, he saw more truth than he ever had before. The loneliness in his children's eyes, the exhaustion on Maria's face, and the cold, calculating control Vanessa quietly held over the house. Then came the night that changed everything. A storm rolled through the city, thunder shaking the windows. Alexander, from his small gardener's shed, saw flashing lights inside the mansion, the security alarms going off. His heart raced. Moments later, Maria came running out, drenched and terrified, clutching Emma and Noah in her arms. She was shouting for help. Something had happened inside, something terrible, and Alexander, still hidden behind his disguise, realized his children's lives were in danger, and that the woman he trusted to marry might be behind it. He ran toward the house, but before he could reach the door, Maria turned and locked eyes with him, gasping in recognition. "Mr. Hale?" she whispered in disbelief. And in that single moment, everything, the lies, the danger, the truth, began to unravel. For a second, Alexander froze, rain soaking through his shirt as Maria stared at him with wide, trembling eyes. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. If Vanessa found out who he really was before he knew the full truth, everything would collapse. He glanced at the children, scared, shivering, and clinging to Maria, and whispered urgently, "Get them to the shed. Don't tell anyone you saw me." She hesitated, confused and frightened, but something in his eyes made her trust him. She nodded and hurried away with Emma and Noah through the rain. Alexander waited until they were out of sight before moving toward the house. The alarms had stopped now, leaving an eerie silence broken only by thunder in the distance. Through the tall windows, he could see lights flickering, curtains swaying from a wind. His mind raced. What had Maria seen? Why had she run out with the children in the middle of the storm? Inside, the mansion felt colder than ever. He stepped carefully through the hallways, remembering every corner, every piece of art he had once chosen himself. It was strange how familiar it all felt, yet so foreign now that he was walking through it as an outsider. He passed the living room, where a glass vase lay shattered on the floor. In the reflection of a mirror, he saw a shadow move upstairs, quick and deliberate. His heart pounded. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, her silk robe fluttering slightly as she held a phone to her ear. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Yes, it's done," she said softly. "Just make sure no one comes to the house tonight. I'll handle everything else." She hung up and turned, her eyes scanning the dark hallway. Alexander stepped back into the shadows, holding his breath. For a brief moment, she looked uneasy, as if she felt someone watching her. Then she walked away. He slipped out quietly and made his way back to the shed where Maria and the children were waiting. Emma had fallen asleep in her arms, while Noah sat beside her, trying not to cry. Maria looked up as Alexander entered, her face pale. "What's going on?" she whispered. "The power went out, and I heard. I don't even know how to explain it. Vanessa was talking to someone. She looked angry." Alexander knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "You can't let her know I'm here," he said. "Not yet. I need to find proof of what she's doing." Maria stared at him, torn between fear and disbelief. "You've been here this whole time," she said slowly. "Pretending to be the gardener?" He nodded, his eyes dark with regret. "I had to. I couldn't trust anyone until I knew what was happening." A distant door slammed somewhere in the mansion, and they all jumped. The wind howled, shaking the shed walls. Alexander placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "Keep them safe," he said. "Whatever happens tonight, don't leave this place." Maria wanted to ask more, but he was already gone, disappearing once again into the rain and shadows. As he approached the mansion, he saw something through the upstairs window. Vanessa standing in his study, holding a folder. Even from the distance, Alexander recognized it. That folder held the original documents for his estate, the only papers that proved he was still the legal owner. She was planning something big, and if she succeeded, he could lose everything, not just his fortune, but his children too. And as lightning flashed across the sky, Alexander finally understood. This wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about survival. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the house still felt heavy with something unspoken. The sun filtered weakly through the clouds, casting long shadows across the marble floors. From the garden, Alexander watched as Vanessa walked out onto the patio, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand, and a look of calm confidence on her face. The kind of calm that hides chaos underneath. She greeted the staff with her usual charm, pretending nothing had happened the night before. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect lady of the house. But Alexander now knew better. From his position behind the hedges, he could hear her giving instructions. "The security system needs to be checked today," she said, her tone sharp. "And make sure the gardener—" She paused, her eyes scanning the grounds. "Where's Alan? He didn't report this morning." Her voice carried a subtle edge. She was suspicious. Alexander realized that if he didn't act carefully, she'd uncover his disguise before he had any proof of what she'd done. Inside the shed, Maria sat with Emma and Noah, keeping them busy with small chores and stories to distract them. She couldn't shake the image of Vanessa on the phone, or the fear in Alexander's eyes. Every time she heard footsteps outside, her heart skipped. She knew she had crossed a line by helping him, but something about the way he protected his children made her believe he wasn't the cold, distant man the world described. He wasn't a billionaire in that moment, just a father trying to save his kids. Back in the mansion, Vanessa made a call to someone named Mr. Carson. Her tone was low and impatient. "The documents are secured," she said, "but I can't finalize anything until the transfer is complete. The sooner we move the assets, the better. If Alexander tries to come back, he'll find nothing left." She stopped suddenly, her eyes drifting toward the window, where she thought she saw movement in the garden. Her expression hardened. "I want that gardener questioned," she said sharply. "Now!" Alexander knew he was running out of time. He needed to find out what Vanessa was planning before she acted. Late that afternoon, while she left for a meeting in the city, he slipped back into the house. Every creak of the floorboard felt like a shout. He moved toward his study, the same room where he'd seen her holding the folder. It was locked, but the old key he'd hidden years ago behind the molding still fit perfectly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of her perfume. The desk drawers had been cleaned out, but the trash bin wasn't empty. He sifted through shredded paper, receipts, and fragments of letters until he found part of a document with his signature on it, but the date and details were changed. She was forging documents to transfer ownership of his company's shares. His pulse quickened. This was bigger than a personal betrayal. She was dismantling everything he had built, piece by piece. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. "You shouldn't be here." It was James, the butler, loyal to the family for years. He stood in the doorway, holding a tray of silverware, his expression unreadable. Alexander froze. "James," he said quietly, "it's me." The butler's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't move. "Sir, you shouldn't have come back like this," he whispered. "She knows something. She's been asking questions about you and the gardener. She's dangerous, Mr. Hale, more than you think." Alexander stepped closer. "Then help me stop her," he said, "for the children's sake." James looked toward the hallway, then back at him. "Meet me tonight by the greenhouse," he said under his breath. "There's something you need to see." Before Alexander could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. Light, deliberate, familiar. Vanessa was back. James quickly exited, pretending not to notice Alexander slipping into the shadows. As Vanessa entered the study, she stood in front of the window, her reflection framed by the gray afternoon light. She smiled faintly, unaware of the man watching her from behind the curtains. "Soon," she murmured to herself, "it will all be mine." And as those words hung in the air, Alexander realized this was no longer just about deceit. It was about uncovering a secret that could destroy everything, including the people he loved most. Night fell quietly over Hale Estate, but the silence carried weight, the kind that made every creak and whisper sound louder than it should. The air was cool and still, and the mansion's tall windows reflected only darkness. Alexander stood in the garden, his heart pounding as he waited near the greenhouse. It was nearly midnight. James had told him there was something he needed to see, something that could finally expose Vanessa's plan. Every minute felt longer than the last. When James finally appeared, he looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "She's moving everything tonight," he whispered. "Money, documents, even your personal accounts. There's a man who comes after dark. He handles everything for her. You need to see this for yourself." Alexander clenched his jaw. "And the children?" "They're still with Maria in the guest cottage." James said, "She's keeping them safe. But if Vanessa realizes they're missing, she'll start looking." Before Alexander could respond, the faint hum of an engine broke the silence. Headlights cut across the garden as a sleek black car pulled up near the side entrance of the mansion. Two men stepped out, strangers both in dark coats, and one of them carried a briefcase. Alexander and James moved quietly behind the hedges, watching as Vanessa opened the door and let them in. Her face was calm, her voice confident as she greeted them. "She's transferring something important," James said, "if we can get proof." But before he could finish, a sharp noise echoed from the far side of the garden. A child's cry. Alexander's blood ran cold. It was Noah. He turned sharply toward the sound, his instincts taking over. He sprinted through the wet grass toward the cottage, ignoring James's warning whispers. When he reached the door, Maria was kneeling by the window, holding Emma close while Noah pointed toward the mansion. "She came here," Maria whispered. "Vanessa. She was asking where the children were. I told her they were asleep, but she didn't believe me." Alexander's mind raced. If Vanessa suspected anything, everything was about to explode. He looked at Maria. "Keep them inside. Don't open this door for anyone, not even James, unless you hear my voice." She nodded, her eyes full of fear and trust. Back at the mansion, the deal was already underway. Through the open office window, Alexander could hear Vanessa's voice. "Once the transfer clears, he'll have no access to his accounts," she said. "Everything will move under the new trust. By morning, it'll be finished." The man with the briefcase nodded. "And what about the children?" he asked. Vanessa's tone darkened. "They'll be handled. I can't have them becoming a problem later." That was enough. Alexander felt a surge of panic and rage rise inside him. He stepped closer to the window, listening as she opened a safe hidden behind a painting, the same one he'd had installed years ago. Inside were the original documents she'd forged. He had to get them back before she made her final move. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Vanessa turned, her eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" she snapped. Alexander ducked behind the wall, his breath shallow. He heard footsteps coming closer, the men searching the hallways. He slipped inside to the side door, moving silently toward the study. His mind was clear now. Every decision, every move mattered. If he failed tonight, he would lose not just his fortune but his children's safety. As he reached the office door, he saw Vanessa standing near the safe again, the briefcase open beside her. For the first time, her polished expression faltered. "You!" she whispered, realizing who was standing in the doorway. Alexander stepped into the light. "It's over, Vanessa," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The thunder rumbled again, and the tension between them felt electric. Then she smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "You think you can stop this?" she said softly. "You're too late, Alexander." Behind her, the man with the briefcase reached for something inside his coat, and Alexander took a cautious step forward. Outside, Maria was holding the children close, watching the lights in the mansion flicker wildly. Inside, the truth was finally colliding with the lies, and before dawn, only one of them would still have everything. The room seemed to shrink as Alexander faced Vanessa, the storm's echo rumbling faintly in the distance. Her calmness made his skin crawl. She wasn't surprised to see him. Not really. She had expected this. "Too late?" he repeated, his voice low but steady. "You've stolen enough already. It ends tonight." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her eyes glinting with something close to amusement. "You think you've uncovered everything, don't you?" she said softly. "But you have no idea who you're really fighting." Before he could respond, the man beside her, the one holding the briefcase, stepped forward and set it down on the table. He opened it slowly, revealing not money, not documents, but photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of Alexander in the garden, at the shed, even near the children's cottage. Every moment he thought he'd gone unnoticed had been recorded. "I've known since the day you came back," Vanessa said, her voice sharp now. "You were never as clever as you believed, Alexander. Did you really think you could hide from me on your own estate?" Alexander's heart sank. She had been watching him all along. Every night he'd spent planning, every whisper to Maria, all of it had been part of her game. "You used the security system," he realized. "You turned my own house against me." Vanessa smiled faintly. "You built this empire on control. I just learned how to play by your rules." Before he could react, the man pulled out a small black device from his coat and pressed a button. Somewhere outside, an alarm blared. The lights flickered again, then went completely out, plunging the mansion into darkness. Alexander's instincts kicked in. He lunged toward the desk, but Vanessa had already stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. From the hallway came the sound of hurried footsteps, not one pair, but several. More people were inside now. Alexander's pulse thundered in his ears as he moved through the dark, trying to get his bearings. He could barely make out the outline of the briefcase, still sitting on the table. He grabbed a handful of photographs and shoved them into his pocket. Proof, if he could survive the night long enough to use it. Downstairs, James was calling his name. "Mr. Hale," he hissed urgently. "They're searching the grounds. You have to get to the children now." Alexander ran through the corridor, narrowly avoiding the men now sweeping through the mansion with flashlights. Vanessa's voice echoed faintly through the hall. "Don't let him reach the garden," she ordered. "He doesn't leave this house." Outside, Maria clutched Emma and Noah tightly, her eyes darting toward the mansion's glowing windows. She could hear voices, sharp, angry ones, and the sound of glass breaking. Every instinct told her to run, but she couldn't leave without knowing Alexander was safe. Suddenly, a shadow appeared by the greenhouse. It was James again, or so she thought. But when he stepped closer, she saw a stranger wearing James's jacket. "Where are the children?" he demanded. His tone was wrong, cold, commanding. Maria's stomach dropped. "You're not James," she whispered. The man's hand moved toward his coat pocket, and Maria grabbed the children, pulling them back into the cottage and locking the door. Her hands trembled as she turned off the light and whispered, "Stay quiet." Back inside, Alexander burst into main hall just in time to see Vanessa at the front door, handing over a document to one of the men. "Signatures, transfer codes, everything," she said calmly. By morning, the accounts will be cleared. Then she turned and saw him standing there, bruised, soaked, but unbroken. For the first time, her expression faltered. "You're fighting the wrong person," he said, "because you're not the only one keeping secrets here." Vanessa frowned. "What are you talking about?" Alexander reached into his pocket and threw one of the photographs onto the floor between them. It wasn't taken by her people. It showed Vanessa with someone else. The man beside her in the photo wasn't a stranger at all. It was a supposed lawyer, Mr. Carson, standing in his office weeks before Alexander's disappearance. They had planned this long, before he ever went undercover. Her face paled, just for a moment. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. Alexander's jaw tightened. "From someone who's been watching both of us." And before Vanessa could answer, a new voice came from the doorway, calm, familiar, and chillingly composed. "That would be me." Alexander turned, stunned. It was James, the real James, holding something in his hand. Not a weapon, but a folder marked confidential. "Mr. Hale," James said quietly, stepping closer. "There's something you need to know. Something that changes everything you think you understand about this house." The tension thickened like fog. Vanessa stepped back, her mask of control cracking for the first time. The briefcase, the photographs, the voices outside, they all suddenly felt connected to something much larger than betrayal. And as lightning flashed once more through the tall windows, Alexander realized that the woman he thought was his greatest enemy might only be a piece of a far darker game. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint drip of rain from a broken window. James stood near the doorway, his expression calm but his eyes carrying years of secrets. Alexander stared at him, trying to read what was behind that steady gaze. Vanessa, for the first time, looked uncertain. "What are you doing, James?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "You work for me." James shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I've always worked for the Hales, since before you ever came here." He looked at Alexander, then opened the folder in his hand. "You thought she was after your company, your money, and she was... But there's something you didn't know. This wasn't her idea." Alexander frowned. "What do you mean?" James handed him the papers. The top page bore a corporate seal, one Alexander recognized instantly. His late father's foundation. "Your father left something hidden in the estate," James explained. "A secondary will. It was sealed years ago and tied to an account that Vanessa discovered by accident when she joined her company. The moment she found it, she knew what it contained. Enough to give her full control if you were declared unfit to run the business." Vanessa's face went pale. "You shouldn't have told him," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're doing." Alexander looked down at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. The documents proved that the foundation was never hers to touch, and that she had been manipulating board members to make it appear otherwise. Everything she had built was about to crumble. "So all of this," he said slowly, "every lie, every plan wasn't just about me. It was about my father's legacy." Vanessa took a step closer, her voice shaking but still sharp. "You don't understand," she said. "He promised it to me. Before he died, he said he'd make sure I was taken care of. I only did what I had to." Alexander stared at her, the truth sinking in. His father had known Vanessa before him. The realization hit like a blow. "You were with him," he said quietly. "Before you met me." Her silence was answer enough. The betrayal went deeper than he'd ever imagined. Outside, headlights appeared through the rain. Police cars rolled up the driveway. James had called them before entering the house. Vanessa backed away, realizing what was coming. "You think this will stop me?" she said. "You think money and papers will erase what we had?" Alexander's voice was calm but final. "There's nothing left to erase." She turned suddenly, reaching for the briefcase, but James was faster. He grabbed it, and the photograph spilled across the floor. Evidence of every move she'd made. The officer stepped inside moments later, and Vanessa froze, her perfect composure finally cracking. She looked once more at Alexander, her eyes full of something between anger and heartbreak. "You'll regret this," she whispered as they led her away. When the doors closed behind her, the house fell silent again. Alexander stood still, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The lies, the loss, the years he'd spent building walls around himself. James placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over now," he said quietly. But as Alexander turned toward the window, his eyes caught something strange. The men who had come from Vanessa weren't wearing standard police uniforms. Their cars bore no markings. His breath caught. "James," he said slowly, "who did you call?" James didn't answer right away. He looked at Alexander, almost regretful. "The people your father trusted," he said softly. "The ones who've been watching over this estate long before you took over." Outside, the unmarked cars pulled away with Vanessa inside, disappearing into the night. For a moment, it felt like justice. But deep down, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something larger had just begun. He looked back at the papers in his hand, the foundation documents, the second will, the hidden account, and there at the bottom of the final page was a name he hadn't seen in years. It wasn't Vanessa's. It wasn't his father's. It was James's. The signature was clear and dated months before any of this began. Alexander slowly looked up, meeting James's calm, unreadable eyes, and realized the truth. The man who had saved him from one betrayal might have been the architect of another. And as the last echoes of thunder faded beyond the mansion walls, Alexander understood one final thing. In his world, trust was never real. It was just another mask. As the police cars finally disappeared down the long driveway, a strange calm settled over the Whitmore estate. The storm had passed, leaving behind the faint scent of wet earth and pine drifting through the open windows. Richard stood by the doorway, his hand resting on the old wooden frame, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. For the first time in months, he could breathe without feeling the weight of fear pressing on his chest. The house, once filled with tension and secrets, now seemed quieter, almost as if it too had been holding its breath. Clara walked out from the study, her face pale but calm. The truth was finally out. The investigation had confirmed that Ethan's accident wasn't random. It had been planned by someone inside Richard's own company, someone who saw his family as a threat to their greed. The revelation hit Richard hard, but at the same time it brought clarity. For so long, he had blamed himself, believing his decisions and distance had caused everything. But now, with the truth in the open, he finally understood it wasn't his wealth that ruined things. It was the people who want to take it all away. He turned toward Ethan's room. The machines that once filled the space with cold, mechanical sound were gone now. Ethan lay peacefully, breathing on his own. His fingers twitched every now and then, small signs of recovery that filled Richard with quiet hope. Clara sat by his bedside, reading softly from one of Ethan's favorite childhood books. Her voice was gentle, carrying warmth that made the room feel alive again. Richard joined her and placed a hand over Ethan's. "He's stronger than we ever knew," he said quietly. Clara smiled through tears. "He always was. You just forgot to see it." That simple sentence hit Richard deeper than any business deal or courtroom victory ever had. It wasn't just about Ethan's strength. It was about his own blindness to what truly mattered. In the following weeks, things began to change. Richard shut down the corrupted division of his company and started a foundation in Ethan's name, focused on helping families of accident victims. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a place where people came for help, comfort, and support. The whispers of guilt and fear that used to haunt him were replaced with laughter and purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky gold, Richard stood by the window once more. He could see Ethan outside, sitting in the garden with therapist, slowly regaining his strength. Clara was nearby, tending to the flowers Ethan had planted years ago. The scene felt like life had come full circle, fragile, but beautifully alive. Richard smiled softly to himself. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a man burdened by his past. He felt like a father, one who had been given a second chance. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, he finally understood that no amount of power or wealth could ever replace what truly made life worth living: love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.